All right, aloha.
course of the semester. So,
I'm going to kick us off here on our campus conversation. This one's devoted to strategic planning. And as many of you know, our strategic plan, Achieving Our Destiny, the fallout from that planning process was a strategic planning committee, which then picked working groups to move forward the plan of achieving our destiny. All of this, of course, is wrapped up into our four major thrusts, which I sometimes break into more like three, but it's that we provide those transformative learning experiences for our students or help them find their passion, that we do research that has high impact and service that fits into our community, so the research and service that matters, and that we engage our communities in such a way and change the scope of our university that we're a Hawaiian place of learning. And what we've seen is an evolutionary process of our strategic planning groups and our working groups. It's involved something like 150 of our faculty, students, staff, and even alumni. And this effort has been directed by Susan Hippensteele, and we have a $50 bet that I would talk for less than a minute, and then as I'm into the 50 seconds now, I have to hand the microphone over. But Susan, I'm going to let you take it from here, and we're fortunate to have our working group committee chairs with us this morning. So thanks for being here, and I hope we see a very lively discussion. Feel free to interject, and let's get a good conversation going about strategic planning. Susan?
Can you hear me through this? Okay. I do want to thank everyone for coming and also acknowledge that there are people watching us live. Unfortunately, they cannot contribute questions and comments. We'll try to work on the technology for that. The web link to the strategic plan is here, and we'll post it at the end again. You can do an easy search looking for Achieving Our Destiny on the main page and get to the implementation information. I encourage you to do that. We're not going to go through, I'm not going to describe the process for developing the plan. We're going to get right to implementation. But on that website is all of the data, all of the studies, and the information about the development of the plan, the SWOT analysis, and the process that we went through to develop the plan itself, as well as regularly updated information from all of the different working groups, including all of the groups that you're going to be hearing from here today, all the reports that they generate, the recommendations, and so forth, so that you can follow along with the work as it's occurring. So I've pulled a couple of quotes, a couple of sections from the strategic plan so that you have a sense of what it includes, some of its components. Part of the process involved developing a new vision and mission. We did that at the end of the planning process after we developed goals and filtered up all of the data and all of the information from focus groups and so forth about what people wanted to see this campus look like in 5 to 10 years, and culling from all of the information and input, we developed both a new vision and a new mission. The values emerged across all of the different themes, and the next page is going to be the 4 different goals that Tom referenced. Hawaiian place of learning, local to global, sustainability, technology, and community and diversity. These 5 themes weave throughout the entire plan. So each of the 4 goals and the initiatives that working groups work on are intended. I mean, we ideally address issues that impact all of these different value areas. So we have 4 different goals in the strategic plan: transformative teaching and learning environment, global leading research university, engaged university and facilitating excellence, In essence, we're looking at teaching and learning, research, engaged university that's really looks at community engagement, at different ways that we can incentivize and promote deeper, more lasting partnerships with the community from the university's sort of the full range of things that the university does here on campus, trying to build out and extend ourselves beyond sort of the parameters of our campus. Facilitating excellence is really looking at our infrastructure and examining our processes, our practices, and our technologies and ways that we can better support the full range of efforts in both in teaching, learning, research, and in community engagement. So as Tom mentioned, so far we've had about 150 students, faculty, staff, administrators, and people from the Alumni Association involved in implementing the strategic plan. We've had a number of working groups so far. A couple of these have broken up into subcommittees. I've put them up here in the order in which they were convened. There are 2 working groups so far that have completed their charges and finalized their recommendations. They will be presenting first. We have Engaged Scholarship Working Group, and Liana Wong is here from Hawaiian Language as the representative of that group. The Ph.D. Funding Working Group, which completed their work in December. Ron Bontico from Philosophy is here as the representative of that working group. The Engaged Learning Working Group, which was originally completed with its charge last spring. The Chancellor asked us to work on a revised charge, so we reconvened the group with some different membership and are working on a new charge. Robin Hadwick from Scheidler is here as the convener of the Engaged Learning Working Group. The Sustainability Working Group began in spring 2013. Jim Henry from English and the Manoa Writing Program is here as the Sustainability Working Group convener. The Instructional Innovation Working Group, which is a working group that's looking at innovative classroom renovation and training for faculty. Steve Robineau from Biology is the Instructional Innovation Working Group convener, and he's here to present an update on that group. And the Business and Operational Practices Working Group is our most recent working group to be convened. Earl Matsushita from Building and Grounds is the BOP Working Group convener, and that working group is looking at business processes and a variety of different issues that Earl will describe to you. So Tom and I will remain after they run through their presentations, and as a group, we will try to answer any questions that you have. Maya?
Ai aloha mai kākou. Mahalo nui ka hele ana mai I loko keia la o I hele I loko kaua. Thank you all for braving the rain. The first item we had was about tenure and promotion criteria. The Engaged Scholarship Working Group has recommended that engaged scholarship activities be considered as part of the scholarship requirements in decisions on tenure and promotion. It is important to understand that this does not mandate the inclusion of engaged scholarship activities in a dossier submitted for tenure and promotion or tenure and promotion review. Instead, it encourages departments to expand the criteria on which tenure and or promotion can be awarded so that they include engaged scholarship work with communities. The second bullet is Native Hawaiian community engaged scholarship. It is recommended that $120,000 be allocated to the initiative, this initiative that is designed to support graduate students in the tune of to the tune of $50,000, faculty $50,000, and undergraduate working in conjunction with faculty mentors $20,000. to conduct scholarship that involves working with the community as opposed to working over the community. Both Native Hawaiian and non-Native Hawaiian scholars are eligible if they are working with significant buy-in from the Native Hawaiian communities. Non-Native Hawaiian scholars who have long-lasting partnerships with Hawaiian communities will thus be eminently eligible. Whereas this is a Native Hawaiian initiative, single Native Hawaiian scholars will be considered Native Hawaiian communities in their own right, regardless of the nature of their research. A review committee will be established with heavy representation from various Native Hawaiian groups. Oh, goodness. Sorry.
That's all we need now.
Including representation from the deans and directors, Manoa Faculty Senate, and ASUH. The committee's primary function will be to select recipients whose projects exemplify the idea of community-based scholarship and to evaluate the project report on the manner in which it directly engages the community. And then the third item is the HAP focus course expansion. And this one we're a little concerned about this one being whether or not we'd get buy-in from it, but I just want to assure people that it's not something that's going to be imposed on anybody, but it's actually good for the students. So some students have to go outside their chosen fields to study fields of study in order to fulfill the HAP requirement. This recommendation is meant to encourage departments to modify and or add HAP courses course offerings in order to facilitate the fulfillment of these requirements within the field. HAP courses would be developed to support the course of study required by particular departments and reduce time to degree. Finally, this and the first bullet are both no-cost items.
The 5-year full funding for doctoral students working group was given a charge that differed from those of the others in some sense. We understood that it was something more aspirational than perhaps immediately feasible for implementation given the financial situation of the university. But nonetheless, we took our charge fairly seriously and came up with the kinds of recommendations that we think a research university that takes the cultivation of its graduate program seriously should commit itself to, and we hope to commit to at some point when the financial situation improves, so as to make this possible. The problems that we were hoping to address were first the comparative non-competitiveness that we find ourselves facing with regard to attracting top flight graduate students into programs that are not in a position to provide them with the kind of financial support that they can receive at other universities. So we're hoping to remedy that problem. Second problem is, as many of you are probably no doubt aware, many of our grad students have difficulty given the need to support themselves financially through their doctoral programs, find it difficult to make timely progress through the degree and complete in a sort of time fashion that we think is appropriate. And that, of course, feeds into a third problem, which is, since they take too long, they often find themselves at a disadvantage in terms of getting positions in the market, getting placed in the market. So we're trying to address all three of those problems, and the solutions that we came up with were fairly obvious, fairly straightforward. The first and most important is the provision of a guarantee of 5 years of full funding for all of our Ph.D. students outside of the professional schools. They've got to be full-time. The idea for excluding the professional schools here is that many of the kinds of salaries that they are looking at after completion are going to be more than compensating them for the sacrifice they make in paying tuition and so forth while they're here. The real bite in PhD programs is with those future academics, those aspiring future academics who are never going to earn nearly what they could have if they'd gone into business or law or something, to support them so that they can in fact get through and prepare the next generation of academics for us. So there is an exclusion that's important to notice, that there will be an ineligible class. Also, even in the non-professional disciplines, there are many people who are taking PhD studies part-time. For example, high school teachers in English or history, and these people as well would be considered under a different category, would be considered ineligible for the kinds of support because they're not technically full-time students in the doctoral program. But for those that are, and that are not ruled ineligible, 5 years of full funding is the starting point that we're thinking in terms of. That would definitely be a cutoff after 5 years in order to encourage timely completion. But in order to provide further motivation, in the 5th year, the idea is that there would be a series of doctoral dissertation completion awards that would be made available that would be distributed on a competitive basis. So while everybody is entitled to 5 years of full funding, the difference between getting 5 years of full funding without the dissertation completion fellowship or with the completion fellowship is that as a GA, of course, you are expected to do 0.5 FTE equivalent teaching or research work in order to earn that support, whereas the doctoral dissertation completion award would free you up completely during that time. And finally, the last provision is to ensure that best practices with regard to the mentoring of students and with regard to the cultivation of a climate of procurement of funding wherever possible is instilled within departments. But as I said, much of this we understand is aspirational at this point and can only be implemented as financial conditions permit.
Is that me? Okay, the Engaged Learning Working Group started out looking at some of the issues really around retention and graduation rates and kind of the understanding that greater engagement of the students would help us achieve better numbers in those areas. And we met, as Susan indicated, last year and came up with the 4 recommendations under the 2012-2013 heading, and we do continue to meet this year. So I'll just briefly touch on the recommendations. One of them is for an undergraduate capstone experience in all of our programs. They're already very common on campus. I think the number was something like 52 out of 93 have some kind in place already. A lot of different models available from, overall project that pulls the different courses together, or a specific class that incorporates all of the learning to that point. And what we would like to say is that departments that already offer one would be encouraged to make that a requirement, and those departments which do not yet offer one start the process of developing a capstone class experience. Electronic portfolios is our second recommendation. E-portfolios, which we find to be something good as a process of making, but also in the product of what the students end up with. And they really connect the community of the student to the classroom, and is a great way to display kind of the richness of the on-campus learning experience. Having said that, there's several different models, and there are a few programs on campus that already have them, but maybe within our system, the most highly developed one is the Kukui platform at a KCC, and we might have an opportunity to partner with that group to, move us more quickly and also save some of those costs that would go along with that. The Exploratory Student Program, ESP, is really focused on the idea that we know that when students have declared majors, our retention is going to be better with them, and we're able to focus more resources on them. And so right now we have an issue where only 41% of the Manoa students have, 41% have not declared a major by the end of their second year. And through a series of advising and workshops, co-curricular activities, we would want to see a way to work on that. And again, here we've looked at a similar model, similar program in place at Florida State that within a 5-year time frame of implementation had greatly improved the percentages of freshmen who were declared into majors and therefore making it through their entire program. The fourth recommendation from last year is on the area of civic engagement, and this one remains a fairly broad one. We do believe that it is often through civic engagement that students find their passion, but we want to continue to recognize that there's a really wide array of engagement activities where it's service learning, collaborative partnerships, community-based research. So in any of those areas, we believe that that would, again, add greatly to the engagement level of our students. And in the ongoing in-process recommendations for 2013-2014, actually just came from our most recent meeting on this subject, but we are looking at the idea of an engaged learning course designation. So in simple terms, to say that it would have a similarity to our written or oral focused classes, that it would be something that a group would work towards identifying some classes as identified for their engaged learning activities. And what we envision at this point is a tiered system where you would get increased student semester hours for a department if they had a lot of the classes that were designated into this sort of learning. It's, as we say, this one definitely still in process, and we're working on it.
Aloha, everybody. I'm representing the Sustainability Working Group. Our group worked really in two parts, graduate level at the undergraduate level. I originally joined the group as an interested participant. John Cusick was our original convener, but he's off island, and so I'm filling in for him, and notice that my status has been elevated to convener. So I have quipped that I'm the person on this working group probably with the least content knowledge in sustainability. So if you have technical questions at that level, we can solicit some of the people in the room who have more than I, but I can fill you in on the process. Our first point is establishing a Sustainability Institute or Center, including finding a home and equipping an office and staff. This is in process, and hiring a director. This has recently been completed. We've worked on establishing an undergraduate certificate in sustainability studies, and this has entailed reviewing certificates at other universities and at UH Manoa, using the environmental studies as a model. That work is complete. We've also developed guidelines for the certificate, and if people have questions about that later, I could elaborate more on those guidelines. We're interested in establishing a BA in Sustainability Studies. To do that, we've established criteria that compare with other degrees nationwide while leveraging our local advantages and articulating with community colleges in the UH system. This emerged partly because at last year's Sustainability Summit at UH West Oahu, we attended a session in which Kapi'olani Community College was presenting their work on an S designation for their courses, and had already come up with a number of criteria which we reasoned we might be able to compare with criteria that we would want to have in place here at UH Manoa. And then having done that, we developed some guidelines. We've got a comprehensive list that's almost complete of courses that we believe would qualify as part of the BA. And we are currently reviewing syllabi to determine a final list. At the graduate level, that group has been reviewing models from other institutions to leverage UHM's advantages. That's completed work. Identified current degree gap areas. That's complete as well, and have been developing new courses and degrees. That's in process. And I can fill in on any details if you'd like after this initial presentation.
I represent the Instructional Innovation Working Group. We set out 3 goals. The first, the slide there, you can look at some nice pictures finally. The first was to come up with classroom design specification templates for different sized classrooms. The impetus for this was to provide student-centered learning environments and environments that promoted collaborative learning, with the recognition that an engaged student is a better informed student. They learn better and they retain longer. So we set out to design, we set out to design typical classrooms that might be used for various sizes. So we have a template now for small classrooms, medium-sized classrooms, and large classrooms, and we have recommendations for the type of furniture and the sorts of layouts that one might consider that could be used in all classrooms and that don't necessarily in any way rely on technology. We then discussed prioritizing the order in which classrooms would be renovated for both new and in classrooms that are in use, and recommending that surveys in both real use be determined to determine the priority order in which classes are renovated. The last piece of the puzzle was to train people to then use these classrooms, because finally students will not be sitting in tablet armchairs or in bolted rows like these. And then providing the training to both graduate students and faculty so that they can effectively use these new spaces to best engage students.
Thanks, Steve. Business and operating practices. I don't have pictures. Tough act to follow there, Steve. But I want a quick show of hands, those that are part of the committee, because I see about at least half a dozen of you out there. Sherry, Clifton, Diane, Tom, Roxanne, Gail. You guys can help me with some of the answers later on. As Susan mentioned, we're the newest group, so we don't have a whole lot of content in the recommendations, but I'm going to go through some of the things that we have in process. The question that we're trying to answer is, what can we change in our day-to-day operations that betters the campus? And we're focusing on 2 different areas, zone management and the building coordinators. So what is zone management? That's a question that actually we're trying to tackle ourselves in our working group. And it means different things to different people, and you've probably been exposed to it in different areas, but a lot of the universities have some form of zone management, and there's a fair number of benefits, improved service, both in terms of timeliness and quality. And I think one other thing that we get a lot of requests for is just updates on information, and we hope that zone management can help provide some of that feedback or improve the feedback loop. And I think a third major benefit is consistent pride and ownership in terms of the facility personnel. We don't view zone management as a panacea, but I think it's a step in the right direction, and I think will be one of our central recommendations. Now, what we're trying to tackle right now is the scope, organization, and the resources needed for us to implement zone management. Organization, how we organize, decentralize or centralize. We actually have a hybrid right now, and as funny as it may seem, those around the table, we're still trying to figure out what each other does and how we're organized. That's our meeting tomorrow. So I think we're going to try to get a little bit deeper and try to flesh some of that out. But as far as the scope, that's a really important question, because I don't know if you're like me. At home, I'm my janitor, landscaper, trades guy, sort of, and you get what you pay for, right? So I'm free labor, and I tell my wife that's what you get, quality-wise. So in terms of the university, we also have to make some choices in terms of what our scope of responsibility is, what we can afford to do, and what the expectations are for all the users. And that's, I think, a question bigger than the committee, but as we approach zone management, that's one of the questions that we're trying to tackle. How many plumbers, how many electricians, how many janitors, landscapers, and so on do we need to fulfill our charge in servicing the university? Read Richard Brecka's editorial from last week, and you'll get a picture of how some of the public feels about that point. So it's a big task, but I think we have the right people around the table to try to answer that question. And I think the last part on this scope organization resources is measurement. The new buzzword for us is metrics, and trying to make sure that we have a good system to measure our processes and our results. So that's zone management. Building coordinators, again, quick show of hand, who's a building coordinator or think they might be? And so I think a lot of you guys might not be being shy, because the building coordinator list, or one of the lists we have, is huge, hundreds and hundreds of people. So I think even Chancellor Apple might be on there. So one of the problems is we found there's a lot of lists, and not everybody knows that they're on one of those lists. So that's one of the issues. And also that what is needed from a building coordinator for a 12-month renovation versus I want to do carpet cleaning in Kaikindal 101, very different skill sets. So we're trying to take a step back, trying to pull together our list and figuring out what are the main skills and I think minimal qualifications we need for the building coordinators. And what I think I'm going to ask everybody is, if your dean or director asks you if you want to be a building coordinator, please say yes, because we do need contacts out in the field for us to have good communication and good feedback for any of the facility projects. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Susan and the Chancellor.
So I too see a number of people out in the audience who either are currently or who have served on a working group. Can I see a show of hands of everybody who has ever served on one of the working groups or on the strategic planning committee? Yeah, a good number of people. And I want to just say for the record, this has been a pure pleasure. I mean, these people have volunteered their time. They work very hard. They work in the committee and then outside of the committee doing research and putting together these proposals. We've tried to be as comprehensive as possible in making recommendations that have broad impact. We focus primarily on the student experience, but as you can see from the range of recommendations thus far, it touches a full range of aspects of university functioning. So we're now here, all of us, to answer questions. And who's first?
I'm not shy.
Earl, with regards to the building coordinators, would that also be like an emergency point of contact for that building? In the event of, say, a flood or another event, who do we call?
I think that definitely could be one of the responsibilities, Jimmy. And I think that's one of the challenges, because there's so many different types of communication and that goes out to, and I think we're all bombarded by email. So I think having a certain focus for the building coordinators, and maybe there are I'm going to be rambling, so I think this is something that we'll probably take up in the committee as far as defining that, and I think emergency might be a very good, and security would be a good thing to include.
Thank you, Susan. I would like to know what is the process of approving these recommendations. Do the community have any input into this?
So there are, it depends on the recommendation, frankly. The Strategic Planning Committee gets all of the recommendations. So the recommendations, and there's kind of a back and forth. I serve as a liaison between all of the committees and the Strategic Planning Committee. And so the working groups come up with an idea. I take it to the Strategic Planning Committee. If the Strategic Planning Committee thinks it generally sounds good, they'll sometimes sort of make some suggestions for how to sort of adjust it or morph it a little bit, and then before they spend a whole lot of time, a semester or a year working on something, I want to make sure it's going to fly. So once we get that preliminary approval that it's a good idea, then they go back and work it up, then it goes forward. We've sent, depending on the recommendation, there are some that we've sent to ASUH and GSO, There are some that we've sent to the Senate. There are some that have just gone to the Strategic Planning Committee. It really depends on what the recommendation is. So, is that enough of an answer?
Well, how do we provide input?
The general community? We have not had a process for like sending them out on announce and asking people to give their feedback. They are posted very regularly. Every month, working group activities and notes from the working group meetings are posted. We do have a number of followers. There are people who email me if those notes don't get up in time. If they're a few days late, I get people who email me and say, where are they? So people follow that way, but we have not developed a process for getting, entire, all stakeholder input. This is our first.
Let me just jump in here too. I mean, it probably doesn't need to be said. That's one of the reasons we're doing this.
Exactly.
Today.
This is our first.
But what we ought to do is leave today with some kind of idea of how we want to solicit your input if you don't get a chance to speak today, because this is kind of what this is for, is to socialize some of these ideas and figure out a way to get greater community input. The other side of this then too is some of the things that you've seen do not explicitly require funds, and some do. And the ones that do, we have to take through a much more engaged process to figure out whether we have the money right now to do these things, or what can we do to get some of these things going, and what can't we afford right now. So.
I have a question for that business and operations group. I like to see working on better buildings, facilities, but there's a lot more to business and operations. Well, I'll start with, why are we doing these little work coordination slips on pieces of paper instead of online? And a ton of other procedures that we're still doing with slips of paper, everything from travel to, grade changes. I think there's an awful lot that needs to be addressed in terms of efficiency, and the other one is consistency. Some departments, when they travel, they have to attach boarding passes, others don't. Okay, what's the point? Anyway, so are you looking at expanding your role into all these other areas?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to try to take a part of that. All the work requests are online, and each department may have an internal process where they have a little bit of paper, but the AIM work order system is paperless. As far as the scope, I think we have a lot to tackle with just some of the issues that we've discussed so far, but I'm going to defer to Susan. Maybe after a couple cycles we can expand out. I think facilities has a lot of opportunity, and there's a hell of a lot more that we have to do, I think, before we expand. I don't know, there might be another committee that might be focused on other types of operational practices.
Yes, the Strategic Planning Committee actually discussed how broad the scope of this working group should be, and ultimately decided, with the current emphasis on facilities and our need to really put some time and attention there, to limit the scope of this working group's focus for now. And so the makeup of the group is very specific to the kinds of issues that Earl is talking about. And like engaged learning, it may be the case that once that working group has completed its charge, that it will be reconstituted with a different charge and some change in membership.
Helena, we have a system-wide business process council, which I co-chair, that entertains issues like you brought up at a system-wide level. Working with the Koali financial system, they have a good workflow process built into that we're looking at other applications to put forms online.
So to get back to something that Dr. Apple's, Chancellor Apple said, so some of these things are budget neutral, some of them are going to be very expensive. Will there be a working group on figuring out how to raise the money or redistribute the money to pay for some of these things?
I've asked the vice chancellors to look at some of the various distribution models, if you will. We had a small group of deans who gave us some suggestions on what to do. The vice chancellors are looking at how to distribute revenue, to revenue distribution system that they're going to work on and then bring to the deans and directors leadership group for some socialization. Now that's distribution of revenues. The growing of revenues we're looking at as well, and I think there's really two approaches. One is to look at we do have a student body of about 14,600 here at the undergraduate level, and in the past Manoa has had up to about 18,000 undergraduates, so we're looking at possibilities of raising the number of undergraduate students here. There's some issues with that, of course. And we're also looking at ways of increasing the revenue from the federal government, which is also difficult, but not as difficult as it was a couple months ago.
This is kind of a follow-up on Steve's question, but sorry. I really like all these ideas and programs, and I think it's important that we do these things, but how can we protect the programs we currently have? Are we going to keep getting cut? Because we're afraid. And we're afraid to go forward with these advancements if we're going to be cut with what we have right now.
That's of course the, one of the things I'd say about a strategic plan in general is that while it's always good to have one, it's critical to have one when you're in resource constraints, because what this really is now is about, and we've got to do this at every level. We have to do it at let's say, I'll say my level or the level of the vice chancellors. We have to do it at the level of the deans. We have to do it at the level of the department. And it's really a matter now of looking at the resources we have and saying, are we using these in the best possible way to achieve the, we had up there earlier the missions and the goals. And so it's a multi-tiered, it's a problem that has a whole bunch of different levels to it. And the levels have to interact in the right way so that there's enough feedback so that, I don't go and commit too much to some kinds of central initiatives that put too much of a strain on certain colleges. I'm very sensitive to that. I've gotten feedback to that effect, in fact. And so, we have to make sure that we have these kinds of checks and balances. But it absolutely requires that all levels look at that. An individual department has to look at how it's spending its money. You see things like graduate student funding. Well, should the next $50,000 that we come up with, should we use it for this or that? Those kinds of decisions are important at every level.
One of the things to keep in mind about strategic plan implementation, a process like what we've got right here, what I didn't include here in the preface was the progress indicators. We've got, I think there's 23 of them in the different goals, divided across the different goals. So we have been collecting data on the different progress indicators that were identified by the strategic planning process. And we're all, as a community, responsible for making the changes and the improvements that move us forward in meeting our goals under the strategic plan. What these working groups are charged with doing is developing specific initiatives to help propel us forward in areas that are essentially gap areas, to identify things that we haven't been doing that could push us to a new level, things that are difficult to do piecemeal that can be done better as an entire campus, or that require campus-wide change in order to implement. So that's been their charge thus far. And so this is not the only thing that's going on with strategic plan implementation. This is just a small part of it.
So So this isn't really follow-up. I have a question for Steve. I really like the idea of those classes that you had with making a big class almost like a smaller class size. And I'm just wondering, are there any models that you're following? I mean, can we take our 200 biochemistry courses, student-sized biochemistry courses, and use something like this to give the students a feel that, you know, they're not just mass-produced classes, but they're part of something better? And are there models that you guys follow to look at this? I also noted the smart boards all the way around.
I don't think those were necessarily smart boards. They were at least whiteboards. All of this is based on existing models that are found around the country. And there's any number of them for various size classrooms. The particular question about large classes, I mean, large classes present a particularly difficult problem. And at this point in time on this campus, we have no flat room larger than 1,500 square feet that's used as a classroom, and that currently puts constraints on the number of students you can get in any space. We've definitely spent significant amount of time in committee talking about this issue and in considering the identification of space that could be repurposed effectively and without, well, let's say repurposed effectively. We then get into arguments about the current use of that space and how it could then, you know, and the value of repurposing it to classroom space. Sure, I teach a lecture of 300, and I'd love to teach in something other than an auditorium-style room, right? But at this point in time, we don't have a solution for classrooms of 200 plus. I think that's fair. Roberta, I think is Roberta here? Does that answer your question?
Yes, I have a specific question about the proposed guaranteed 5-year funding for graduate students. I don't quite understand the detail. Is this like a full ride for like an undergraduate? If that's the case, usually only 1 or 2 people get full ride. Or are you proposing this guaranteed funding for every incoming student? And secondly, are there any conditions? I mean, if this funding is through a TA position, you would like to make sure that it's contingent on performance. So I'm a little bit confused about this big idea of 5-year guarantee funding.
Well, one of the things that the Chancellor has been emphasizing for the past couple of years, is we're all aware, is the need to right-size graduate programs. So this is the sort of thing that would definitely go hand in hand with ensuring that the graduate programs only admit students that are extremely deserving of the kind of support we'd be talking about. And yes, there would of course be provisions. Students would have to remain in good academic standing in order to remain eligible. But it is a different thing to be a PhD student at a research university preparing to become an academic and to be an undergrad. So, you know, yes, it is something that we think all PhD students that are in good standing and that deserve to be here should be awarded. So, yeah, it would be for all. It would not be a free ride because it is tied to a GA-ship, so there would be some expectation of you know, earning it, whether through teaching or through research assistance. So it's not quite a free ride as such, except for those that on the basis of you know, competitive application get the doctoral dissertation completion, then there's no expectation of work provided. Does that answer the question adequately?
Well, there's some technical issues. Let's suppose this is funded through a TA-ship. 5 years. Let's say you have met 6 people in your doctoral program. So 5 times 6 is 30 TA. But the first year you only have 5 positions. I mean, do you really have 30 TA positions? I mean, what I'm saying is when you put it in practice, it doesn't really make sense. What you just
Well,
said.
they wouldn't all be TA-ship positions necessarily, but I mean, this would be something that would have to be worked out department by department in terms of what sort of services can be provided. We didn't get into the nitty-gritties of working out how it's actually going to be implemented in each and every department because, as I said, this has got to be combined with right-sizing, and right-sizing is something that hasn't really been pursued very far at this point still, since there's a certain amount of resistance to this, and it's something that's coming, but it'll be worked out. The details will have to be worked out in the process of implementation, and that's a ways away yet still.
There'll be at least 100 comments or questions out there.
Thanks. I'd like to follow up on that last comment, specifically this issue of the 5 years funding for doctoral students. I mean, personally, I think it's perhaps a little bit misguided, if I may. And I guess the premise is to be competitive or to attract students in a competitive way. And I would argue at the Ph.D. level that probably the number one attraction is going to be the faculty member with whom you're getting your degree. And I'm wondering if that came into the strategic planning at all. How do you encourage the strong faculty here with facilities, with proper support, rather than just giving students a higher salary?
On that particular issue, I do think, and I'll just say I'm a former grad dean, that good financial support does not attract a great graduate student. A great faculty research program or a great department attracts very good graduate students. But insufficient financial support deters good graduate students. So I don't think you buy graduate students. A graduate student who's very good is attracted to a particular faculty member or a particular department or a particular program. But if we don't supply adequate funding, the student's not going to come because they're always going to have a choice of several across the country unless we're incredibly unique. And those programs typically that are incredibly unique have found the resources to become that way. So I think the idea of adequate financial support is to not discourage students from coming here. And I would say also that this funding level is not just to attract students, it's to make sure they finish in a reasonable amount of time. There's a really national problem with time to degree in PhD programs and success. Overall, integrated over all fields, I think the success rate, if you assume those who have passed the 15-year mark are permanent no's, it's something like 40%. And the time to degree in some fields has elevated up to 8, 9, 10 years. And the hope here is not only to attract very good students. So you start with a very motivated, better pipeline of people coming here, because you're now getting the students who weren't coming here before because they couldn't afford to come here and didn't want to come here. But once you have that good pipeline, this helps them focus on their dissertation. And if we only fund students for a couple years, then what they're doing is they're earning their living in other ways, like, quite frankly, serving us dinners and when we go out to restaurants and things, and they don't have that time to put into their dissertation. So I think the idea here not only is attracting very good students, but making sure that they can complete in a reasonable time and focus on their dissertation.
I'm sorry that I didn't come early, so I don't know whether you have a chance to cover the timeline of this plan. And I'm sure a lot of great things that, coming along. But then the plan will be expired next year, 2015. So is there any new plans that are coming out, or, what is the plan of updating the existing plan? And what about other units and departments? If we are also working on a strategic plan, should we align with a manoa system? How does it work?
In that we've been having discussions at the system level on whether there should be a system strategic plan or possibly at least strategic directions from the system. So that's a conversation that's just underway. There are some general guidelines at the Board of Regents approved a couple years ago that we're thinking about updating, and we just had a retreat this past Saturday and touched on some of those issues. I hope we can consider this plan evergreen. You know, because we have these working groups, and every now and then we spin a new one up, and maybe one finishes its work, but we should think about the best process for keeping this evergreen, so that constantly, I don't think we have to go back and wipe off the blackboard and start over, but we ought to think about how, on a fairly regular basis, we check off the things that we really feel we've accomplished, but incorporate the new challenges into the process.
When we developed Achieving Our Destiny, we used Defining Our Destiny, which was our previous strategic plan, along with the UH system plan, as some of our defining documents, the guiding documents. And there are many areas of overlap. It's not as if this strategic plan went off in completely different directions from where we were with Defining Our Destiny. What it really did is it refined, and it did exactly as Tom just described. The process identified areas where we had not made as much progress and areas where we wanted to emphasize more going forward, and then kind of drilled down a little bit more to flesh out more detail about what stakeholders really wanted to see. There are all kinds of ways of going through these processes and updating plans. And I've worked with various colleges in the last year or so as to align their planning processes with our current plan, working with a couple right now as well. There's typically a hierarchy, so you align with the next level up, which aligns with the next level up. So it's always a good idea to keep in mind what the plan at the campus level is when you're doing your division level planning.
Three more comments and questions.
Curious to know more about the specifics of getting from 14,000 to 18,000 undergraduates. How much of it is changing the public perception versus facilities versus legislative issues?
What a great question. One of the things, by the way, as I should mention, a strategic direction that's a sub-unit of that is internationalizing the campus. We actually have a very small, and somebody's going to ask me, well, what percentage are international? I'm not going to know the answer. But I know it's much smaller than you find at most universities, and that's kind of surprising given our location. So part of that's internationalization, but we are trying to, let me be very direct, attract more out-of-state students as well who pay a higher tuition, because what that allows us to do is keep the in-state tuition lower and make us more accessible. One of my worries has always been, since Manoa tuition is higher than the rest of the system, is that we end up being more accessible to wealthy students, but not as accessible to poorer students from lower socioeconomic strata. And I don't want that condition. And so I want to find a way for us to have more opportunities for financial aid. I want students who are academically capable of handling Manoa to have that Manoa opportunity. So all that's part of bringing in additional students. We do not have enough residence hall space for more students. In fact, we had 5,100 applications this year for 3,800 beds because we now have very good residence halls. That used to not be the case, but there's one of the areas. There's a whole lot of, sometimes we look at all the challenges, but we sometimes overlook all the great things that have happened here. Our student success rates have been skyrocketing because of everybody in this room. And our 6-year graduation rate is now higher than the average public university. These are kind of things that that our strategic plan is actually already working. But increasing the number of students has a lot of, there's got to be investments that go along with that. But it is, I think, in any kind of calculation, it's a net positive cash flow into the university. And I don't like making it sound like we are a business, though, and we need the revenue. But I think we're capable of handling a modest increase. I don't envision us, and we're not going to get to the numbers we used to be at overnight, nor should we. But a lot of that also has to do with making this campus more attractive and getting our reputation improved for how we serve students. So there's a whole lot of things built into that. I don't know if everyone realizes that this year, when you look at our budget, there's more of our budget comes from student tuition than comes from the legislature. It's the first time that's ever happened. They're only $2 million apart, but our primary funder now is the students. And so being student-centric, attracting more students, and so they need to see a beautiful campus. They need to experience in classes and hear that the classes are engaging. They need to have those kinds of opportunities for exciting transformational experiences, study abroad. They can take advantage of the great diversity we have, but it's a complicated issue, and it's going to take a lot of cooperation across the campus. So we had time for 3 questions, and I talked too long, so now we have one more.
I'm just going back to school. I'm transitioning into retirement, and I'm taking a class at Osher Lifelong Learning. And I would propose to you, because I do give money to UH on a regular basis. I live very close I live in Manoa, and I would say maybe you ought to consider outreach to even try to encourage some retired people. I'm not retired yet, but I'm getting there. This is my transition. To encourage them not only to engage them in interesting ways to keep their minds alert so they don't get Alzheimer's, but secondly, because then maybe they'll donate more to the University of Hawaii. I started to donate when my son went here because I found out how excellent it really was. He went to University of Rochester first and came back to UH for a year and a half, and that's when I started to donate because I saw the difference it made. And I think you ought to try to engage more with the community and maybe older people like myself to get more money.
Well, first of all, thank you for your gifts, because they do make a huge difference. But I think your point is extremely well taken. And engaging in communities, I know a lot of the things they're thinking about are how to do just what you said. So thank you. So first of all, let's give it up for our panel here. And also for all of you in the audience who have taken part in this discussion today, but also have taken part in the strategic planning. Why don't we, Susan, figure out a way to have a place where we can take ideas from the community and post that very visibly. Maybe if you'll allow us to do one email blast out, we'll give you the opportunity to send any of your comments in, and we'll put it into something that won't make it go into your spam filter, but we'll figure out some way or provide something on the website so that we can get further comments, because I know there are a lot of ideas in here that were in the brain but didn't have a chance to come out of the mouth. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for keeping this university moving on a great positive momentum.